A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. Jesus went out to the Mount of Olives. At daybreak, he reappeared in the temple area. And when the people started coming to him, Jesus sat down and began to teach them. A couple had been caught in the act of adultery, though the religious scholars and Pharisees brought only the woman, and they made her stand there in front of everyone. "Teacher," they said, "this woman has been caught in the act of adultery. In the law of Moses, the punishment for this act is stoning. What do you say about it?" They were posing this question to trap Jesus so that they could charge him with something. Jesus simply bent down and started tracing on the ground with his finger. When they persisted in their questioning, Jesus straightened up and said to them, "Let the person among you who is without sin throw the first stone at her." Then he bent down again and wrote on the ground. The audience drifted away one by one, beginning with the elders. This left Jesus alone with the woman, who continued to stand there. Jesus finally straightened up again and said, "Where did they go? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, teacher," came the reply. "I do not condemn you either. Go on your way, but from now on, do not sin anymore." The good news of salvation. In today's readings, Isaiah speaks of the power and sovereignty of God, who has a plan for creation and for each of us. The psalmist then promises that sadness will turn to joy and laughter if we stand strong. Paul, in his letter to the Philippians, further describes our faith lives as journeys pursuing maturity found in hope and satisfaction with God's blessings in whatever form they take. This teaching culminates in our gospel, which is a story unusual for the Gospel of John, where we meet an unnamed woman, famous because Jesus saved her from a crowd who were out to get him. A group of self-righteous individuals interrupt Jesus as he is teaching near the temple. They incorporated Jesus in the periphery of a circle they formed around a helpless and probably angry and disheveled woman. It's all a setup for them to demand that Jesus pronounce his opinion about how to respond to adultery. In their minds, they think that they have designed the perfect no-win situation. Jesus has to choose between contradicting God's law and being an accomplice to stoning a woman that the crowd cares little about. They caught her in the very act of adultery, a crime punishable by stoning, and demand that Jesus render judgment. But the writer John confirms that Jesus too was on trial. The disinterest in the woman's partner shows that justice was of little concern. The opening line of today's first reading from Isaiah describes God as one who opens a way in the sea and a path in the mighty waters. It goes on to quote God as saying, "Remember not the events of the past. See, I am doing something new." When the crowd of bullies set their stage, they weren't counting on Jesus to represent the God Isaiah described. The gang, shaming the woman, amassed a crowd of onlookers and created a tumult comparable to a stormy sea. How was Jesus determined to respond to the mob? He chose gesture and silence. He bent down and using one finger, he wrote in the dirt. Whatever Jesus wrote, it indicted every person in the crowd, dousing their pretentiousness in a cold bath of self-recognition. With all their yelling and bravado, no one had another word to say when Jesus invited the sinless one to cast the first stone. When all was said and done, only the two of them remained. The twist in the story is that the bullies unwittingly cemented a unique bond between Jesus and the woman. Bringing them together as objects of their manipulation, they gave Jesus full reign to do what Jesus did best, invite another into new life. Those who scorned Jesus for hanging around with sinners threw him together with someone who needed his kind of freeing love. Just as had happened for the Israelite slaves in Egypt, oppression and hatred became the occasion to bring this victim into contact with her God. Jesus is giving the woman an opportunity, as Paul states in the second reading, to not give any thought to what lies behind, but to push on to what is ahead, the high calling of God. The scene we contemplate has delicious irony. In effect, the crowd who brings the woman to Jesus has acted like the people who carried their sick to be healed. In the attempt to damn her, they introduced her into the realm of grace. Instead of trapping Jesus, they were forced to judge themselves by the implications of their cherished law. It feels true to me that our LGBTQ community can especially identify with the woman in this gospel story, as we have often been indicted in much the same way for our same-sex attractions and used similarly as scapegoats for acting sexually on them in a way that is different from what might have been considered normative by others. It was healing to hear statements by German Cardinal Marx of Munich in the press on March the 31st, and soothing, asking for changes in the church's long-time teachings regarding LGBTQ persons and their relationships. Our gospel story today, with all of the ugliness it exposes, presents a contrast with the Christ, the new thing that refuses to condemn, that disarms the rock throwers, that brings us home from spiritual exile, that gets the stuck unstuck, that makes a way for us through the desert of shame and unworthiness. In the end, the woman and all of us can say with St. Paul in the second reading, I have indeed been taken possession of by Christ. Today's readings are all about grace and mercy. Richard Rohr teaches that a practice of contemplation carries us into the big river of God's love and enables us to release our fears. Grace and mercy, thus, shows us that we are all much larger than the good or bad stories we tell about ourselves or about one another. These stories are often based on unconscious agendas, and more importantly, are not the whole us and not where life can really happen. Faith might be the ability to trust the big river of God's providential love, which is to trust its visible embodiment as Christ, the flow as the Holy Spirit, and the source itself as the creator. This divine process doesn't need us to change, coerce, or improve it. We just need to allow it to happen and to enjoy it. The big river is already flowing through us, and each of us is only one small part of it. Today, as we continue our Lenten journey, we are invited to contemplate Jesus as the embodiment and sign of God, who, like a flowing river or the sea, is always bringing about something new. As we come to appreciate the ways of the divine, as Isaiah promises, we will continue to be formed by God. According to Isaiah, we will be drawn to stop dwelling on the past and to see what newness that grace will make happen. Lent is a time to experience newness, to sharpen our perception so that this newness of God doesn't pass us by. So let's ask ourselves, what newness are we encountering in our lives during these last weeks of this Lenten season of renewal?